Yo, what up? It's your boy, Mr. E, and today we're going to be converting between fractions and decimals. So, lately we've been dealing a lot with fractions, but now we're going to throw in something to the mix, and that is decimals. Something that we want you to be able to do is be able to see a fraction and know how we can change that into a decimal, but we also want you to be able to see a decimal and change that into a fraction. The one cool thing about this is that we get to hone in on our inner Looney Tune.
Suffering succotash. You're despicable.
Yes, we will be doing a lot of spitting while trying to do some conversions between fractions and decimals. So just hang tight because we'll learn more about it in just a second. Why don't we start with how we would convert a decimal to a fraction? So let's say we had a number, 3 and 7/10. Now, Mr. Ellsbury is a little fancy.
Oh, you fancy, huh? Oh, you fancy, huh? Oh, you fancy, huh? Oh, you fancy, huh?
Because I don't like to say 3.7. I like to say it by its place value, 3 and 7/10, which we can see the 3 is in the ones place and the 7 is in the tenths place. So if we wanted to convert a decimal to a fraction, all we need to do is say it out loud, like an opera singer. So let's try this. We say it out loud, 3 and 7/10, 3 and 7/10, 3 and 7/10, 3 and 7/10. Oh my goodness, there it is. There's the fraction, 3 and 7/10. You would say these two numbers exactly the same. The left is 3 and 7/10, the right is 3 and 7/10. So that's how we would convert a decimal to a fraction. It's that easy. You just have to say it out loud in word form. So let's take a look at some other numbers we can change. So if we had 2 and 3/10, we just change that to 2 and 3 on the top, 10 at the bottom, 2 and 3 over 10. If we had 6 and 8/10, that would equal 6 with 8 on the top and 10 on the bottom. But we could simplify that because both of them are divisible by 2, so that would be 6 and 4/5. If we had 7 and 25/100, we'd go 7 and 25 over 100, which would simplify into 7 and 1/4. 25 is divisible by 25, and so is 100. So converting between a decimal and a fraction is actually not very hard at all. Just remember, you need to say it out loud, use the word form, and then simplify if you need to. Now, moving on to fraction to decimal, I will say this is a little bit more tricky. We're going to learn a little bit about something called benchmark fractions. Benchmark fractions are basically fractions that you should kind of memorize to know how you go from a fraction to a decimal and even to a percent. But percents aren't until 6th grade, and a lot of these numbers we won't need until the future, so we'll get rid of them for now, but just know you will be seeing them later. So these are the ones that we do want you guys to memorize, and we do want you guys writing in your journal. So 1/2 as a decimal is 5/10, okay? So 1/2 equals 0.5. You'd see that a lot in the grocery store. If you're buying something and it costs $2.50, 2.5, that'd be what it'd be. Now 1/3 is kind of special, and you see this squiggly equal sign. 1/3 gives you a repeating 3. It just goes over and over and over. And what we normally do is we write a little bar over the 3, which is called a vinculum, and that just shows that that number is going to repeat on and on and on. Again, that's something you'll learn a little bit more back about in the future. And then the last benchmark fraction is 1/4, and 1/4 equals 25/100. The way I remember that is that a fourth is like a quarter, so like a quarter of a dollar would be 25 cents. So quarter, 1/4, 25/100. So we can convert decimals into or fractions into decimals pretty easily. Let's say we had 6 and 1/2. Okay, 6 and 1/2. If we think about it hard enough, that's just going to be 6 and 5/10. Okay, we can do this with a couple other numbers as well. We have 9 and 1/4. We memorize that. It's going to be 9 and 25/100. We can also do it with things that are not benchmark fractions. So 1 and 11 over 100. Well, we know that that's going to be in the hundredths place, right? 1 and 11/100. Again, we can just use that say it out loud trick that we learned earlier. 1 and 11/100. Then the last one is 5 and 2/5. Now, this one might be a little tricky. You might think, oh, this isn't one we can convert into a decimal. But something that we can do is we can always find an equivalent fraction that has a power of 10 number at the bottom. So for this one, we went from 2/5 to 4/10. These are equivalent things, and we change it to 5 and 4/10. So Converting between decimals and fractions can come in real handy, and it can actually help you solve a problem easier. Sometimes it might be faster and easier to solve it as a decimal. Sometimes it might be faster and easier to solve it as a fraction. Let's take a look at a couple problems where we're going to convert between fractions and decimals. So we have a bunch of numbers here that are in decimal form and fraction form, but we want to change them to the other one, okay? So we have 10 and 2/10 up here. It's in decimal form, but we want to change it to fraction form. So we just say it a couple times, 10 and 2/10, 10 and 2/10. So that would give us 10 as our whole number, 2 as our numerator, and 10 as our denominator. Now, one thing we do want to continue to practice, though, is making sure we simplify. So 2/10, that is both divisible by 2, so that would be 10 and 1/5. Okay? Let's take a look at an example where we have a fraction. We have 12 and 3/4. Now, we didn't really learn the benchmark fraction for 3/4, but we know that 1/4 is 2500ths. So if we have 3 1/4, that would make 2500ths plus 2500ths plus 2500ths, which would give us 12 and 7500ths. So we can use our benchmark fractions to kind of help us repeat and add so that we can get a good answer, okay? Now, this fraction, we have 7 and 13/25ths. 13/25ths isn't really a place value. There's no 25ths place. However, one thing that I notice is I could change 25 into 100. 4 times 25 equals 100. And I could do the same thing at the top. So if I'm going to multiply by 4 on the bottom, I've got to multiply by 4 on the top. Okay? So what that would come out to is we'd have 7 as our whole number. We would have 52 as our numerator and 100 as our denominator. So 7 and 5200ths. Now that kind of sounds more like we could write that in decimal form. And that would give us 7 and 5200ths. So sometimes you'll have a fraction that you can't quite change into a decimal the way we're learning right now, but try to see if you can change that denominator to a power of 10. It could be a tens place or the hundreds place, and you can do it just like you did there. We've got another decimal here, 21 and 2100ths. So again, we could just go 21 here, and 21 in the numerator, 100 in the denominator. Now, we would want to see if these both could be divisible by 2, 3, 5, 7, and 11. But we're going to find that they are not divisible by those together, so that is going to be a simplified answer. And then finally, we have 0 and 9/10. Again, just say it over and over again, 0 and 9/10, 0 and 9/10. And we just say 9 over 10, which give us 9/10. You don't have to write the 0 because 0 does not have a value. If you wanted to, no big deal though, okay? So with a little bit of practice, we should be able to go between decimals and fractions pretty easily and then continue by adding and subtracting them. So you're gonna see a couple problems over these next few days where we're going to have a number with a fraction and a decimal, and we've got to figure out what is the best way to do it, to keep it in decimal form, to put it into fraction form, and sometimes one way will be easier, one way will be harder, but that's something for us to figure out, okay? So I hope this video was helpful. Hopefully you'll be converting decimals and fractions in no time and feeling like a pro. We love you guys, we miss you, and we'll see you later. Bye.